You think you're in control. But what if what you call strength is actually your greatest weakness? Jung said, "The bigger the ego, the closer to the abyss. The danger isn't what you don't know. It's what you're certain you've already mastered. And when pride disguises itself as confidence, you don't even notice you're falling until it's too late." There's an antidote, simple but uncomfortable, that few have the courage to apply. And those who don't use it repeat the same fate, always. Get ready to see what your ego doesn't want you to see. Jung described ego inflation as a phase in life where the self identifies too closely with the conscious mind, specifically with its own self-image. It believes it knows everything. It thinks it's separate from the unconscious, from others, from history. It's at this almost invisible but decisive moment that confidence transforms into a trap. It's when a person, carried away by achievements and applause, starts believing that nothing can shake them. This feeling of invincibility is seductive, but carries poison in equal measure. The inflated ego builds a stage that's too high, and the greater the height, the more violent the fall will be. And the most treacherous part, it never comes with advance warning. The person starts believing their success is proof they're above life's common laws. They begin interpreting warnings as insignificant noise, advice as signs of envy, and criticism as unfair attacks. Gradually, they drift away from reality, like someone moving to a private island where only their own voice exists. In this isolation, the world loses clarity, and their own flaws disappear until they return like an earthquake. It's funny, because from the outside, it seems obvious. Arrogance draws a map to disaster right on the person's face. But from the inside, the vision is blurry, like looking through fogged glass. Excessive self-confidence mixes with a type of blindness that confuses courage with recklessness. Many believe they're just following their own path when they're actually walking on the edge of a cliff. And one stumble is all it takes for the abyss to swallow everything. I remember a businessman I knew so certain nothing could go wrong that he ignored glaring signs of crisis. "That's stuff for weak people," he'd say, with an almost triumphant smile. Months later, he lost his business, friends, and his own mental health. It wasn't bad luck, it was consequence. The curious thing is that, at the time, he didn't realize that each gesture of excessive self-sufficiency was actually a brick in the wall that would separate him from reality. Perhaps the most dangerous thing about the inflated ego is this ability to create a comfortable narrative where everything makes sense and nothing threatens. A narrative that numbs and, at the same time, rocks the person toward ruin. And, if the story continued from there, it would be just tragedy. But there's something deeper happening, something that begins long before the fall itself. When someone starts seeing themselves not as they really are, but as they'd like to be seen, fertile ground for ego inflation is born. It's as if their own reflection in the mirror becomes more important than life outside. The person clings to an idealized version of themselves, polished and shiny, and starts living to sustain it. It's constant theater, where the audience doesn't always exist, but the actor never leaves the stage. This excessive identification with one's own image creates a silent paradox. The more you try to seem authentic, the more artificial everything becomes. Small gestures start being calculated not to express something genuine, but to reinforce a narrative already chosen. And deep down, this image doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be convincing enough to keep appearances intact. Over time, this imaginary bubble starts to suffocate. It's like living in a glass house and pretending the walls are indestructible. From outside, people can see the cracks, but whoever's inside ignores or justifies each one of them. Isolation sets in not because the world pulls away, but because the person closes the curtains of their own perception. I knew an artist who lived exactly like this. Her life looked like a flawless social media feed, but any deeper conversation revealed a disturbing emptiness. She saw herself as the main character of a carefully edited story, except behind the scenes she faced crises she didn't dare admit even to herself. And the more she protected that image, the further she drifted from her own essence. This disconnection from reality doesn't happen suddenly. It's a slow, almost imperceptible process. And maybe that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The person doesn't realize how far they've already strayed from the real world until the consequences come knocking. But before reaching that point, there's a subtle mechanism that keeps everything in place, preventing them from seeing their own limitations. When the ego reaches this point of inflation, any attempt at genuine dialogue starts sounding like a threat. It's as if every word from outside gets filtered through an invisible defense system that discards anything that doesn't feed their own narrative. Feedback stops being seen as opportunity and starts being treated as territory invasion. The resistance isn't explicit. Often, it's masked by a polite smile or an "I'll think about it" that never materializes. This blockage creates a curious phenomenon. The person starts hearing without really listening. Constructive criticism transforms in their mind into proof that others don't understand their vision, or that no one is on their level. It's as if perception were calibrated to reinforce only what confirms the story already chosen. And so reality itself starts bending to adjust to this distorted lens. Blindness to one's own limitations is an inevitable side effect. After all, if you never acknowledge there's something to improve, how will you notice where you're going wrong? It's like driving at night with headlights off, believing the road ahead is perfectly lit. At first, it might even seem safe, until the first sharp curve reveals there was no light at all. I remember a writer who, after some success, started completely ignoring editors' opinions. He said his art didn't need adjustments, that any criticism was a sign of others' mediocrity. The result was predictable: books increasingly disconnected from the public, selling less with each launch. He didn't realize the fall had already begun the moment he decided to stop listening. This type of resistance creates a vicious cycle. The more the person ignores what they don't want to hear, the more isolated they become. And the more isolated, the more convinced they are that they're right. It's a labyrinth without windows, where the only voice that echoes is their own. But this voice, however convincing it may seem, isn't capable of protecting them from an even more subtle and dangerous phenomenon. Imagine a mind so focused on itself that it becomes incapable of hearing any contrary voice, as if trapped in a deep trance. Carl Jung called this phenomenon self-hypnosis, a kind of mental state where the ego gets hypnotized by its own image, unable to see beyond it. It's as if the mind created an endless echo, where you only hear your own discourse, in a repetition that reinforces illusions and rejects inconvenient truths. This state is particularly dangerous because it creates an invisible barrier between the person and the real world. Trying to argue, show facts, or offer another perspective becomes useless because the mind has already chosen what to believe, and nothing outside that script makes sense. It's like trying to wake someone who's deeply asleep, trapped in a dream they don't want to abandon. Think about the situation of a leader who, convinced of their own infallibility, refuses advice from their team. Any attempt at dialogue is dismissed, not out of superficial arrogance, but because their mind is already dominated by this self-hypnosis. The resistance isn't just external, but internal. They can't reason with any voice other than their own. And of course, this type of blockage sets the stage for disastrous decisions. I know cases where people become true walls to themselves, unable to recognize they're immersed in this mental trance. These are moments when reason seems switched off, and what prevails is a painful self-deception that can last years. This internal hypnosis is silent, but its force is immense because it blinds and paralyzes, leaving the person vulnerable to errors that could be avoided. It's at this point that the ego stops being an ally and becomes disguised enemy, controlling the mind from the inside out. Jung's self-hypnosis is a powerful explanation for understanding why so many people insist on paths that only lead to downfall, even when faced with clear warning signs. And if all this seems too grim, wait until you see what this bubble of illusion hides behind the false strength it appears to display. It's common for the inflated ego to present itself as an invincible giant, a fortress that no one can tear down. The appearance is one of strength, confidence, and absolute control. However, this mask is just that, a facade hiding deep fragility, almost invisible to whoever's inside it. It's like a house of cards that looks imposing until the slightest wind blows and brings it all tumbling down. This false robustness feeds the illusion that everything is under control, but deep down, it's a precarious balance. With each external attack or internal challenge, the structure trembles, even if no one notices. Often the fragility appears in small signs, a disproportionate burst of anger, a cutting silence, or an irrational fear of criticism. These are symptoms of an ego in crisis, trying to stay above water at any cost. I know people who, at the height of success, showed blind confidence, but who, behind the scenes, lived consumed by anxiety and insecurity. A powerful executive confessed to me that her fear of losing the perfect image made her work to exhaustion, always worried about hiding any flaw. The apparent strength was actually the expression of immense pressure she put on herself to avoid collapse. This dangerous game between appearance and reality is the essence of ego inflation, armor that seems impenetrable but hides open wounds. The more the person tries to maintain this image, the further they drift from authenticity and true resilience, which comes from humility and accepting one's own limits. That's why this strength isn't just false, it's a silent invitation to collapse. What seems like an unbreakable wall is actually corroding from within, and just like an unexpected storm can bring down a poorly built structure, the inflated ego faces constant risk of ruin. But this hidden fragility is only part of the story, because there's a pattern that repeats this dance between illusion and downfall. Curious to know what it is? In day-to-day routine, it's easy to notice how the inflated ego manifests in common, almost natural attitudes. There's that colleague who speaks loudly in meetings, not because they have something relevant to say, but to ensure their voice is the only one heard. Or the boss who, surrounded by warnings, keeps believing they know everything, ignoring the voices trying to guide them. This confusion between volume and value is a clear sign that something's out of place. Another classic example is people who won't admit mistakes, who turn any feedback into a battle. They prefer building invisible walls to acknowledging their limitations. I know a friend who, even when faced with undeniable proof, never accepts she's wrong. For her, admitting failure is synonymous with weakness. This stance ends up creating emotional isolation that corrodes relationships and blocks personal growth. These behaviors repeat at different scales, from small family discussions to decisions affecting entire companies. In all cases, the root is the same, an ego that can't stand losing space, that feels threatened by confrontation, and that prefers the silence of arrogance to the humility of listening. This resistance ends up creating a cycle where growth is interrupted before it even begins. Life, like a mirror, returns these attitudes in the form of conflicts, missed opportunities, and emotional wear. It's as if the inflated ego lived in a bubble where external truth has no passage. This might seem distant, but believe me, we've seen cases of public leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people who, by not accepting advice, ended up losing everything they'd built. This everyday reality shows us that ego inflation isn't an abstract or philosophical problem, but a dynamic present in our closest interactions, and understanding this is fundamental to recognizing the signs in yourself or others. But if this is the trap, what's the way out? This leads us to something essential, almost revolutionary, that we'll explore next. Humility isn't weakness, but the silent strength that opens doors the closed ego would never reach. It's born from sincere recognition that no matter how much we know or achieve, there's always something beyond our reach. This stance allows us to see the world with clearer eyes, deconstructing the idea that we're isolated islands. By accepting our smallness within a greater whole, we gain freedom to grow without fear. Awareness is the lighthouse that illuminates this inner journey. It's the ability to observe our own thoughts and emotions without being fooled by empty narratives. When someone develops this attention, they start noticing the ego's traps, identifying when they're being hypnotized by themselves. This clarity creates space for wiser choices, away from illusions that once seemed unbreakable. Accepting that we're part of something greater breaks the prison of the solitary ego. Imagine a river that insists on being the sea, ignoring its role in the water cycle. That's how it is for those who refuse to recognize they're part of a complex network of relationships, stories, and learnings. This acceptance brings a sense of belonging that is, at the same time, a source of peace and motivation to act with more empathy and balance. Often, those who embrace this conscious humility start facing their own mistakes with unexpected lightness, transforming obstacles into real stepping stones for growth. For example, a close friend, by letting go of the need to be the center of attention, was able to listen more carefully and expand his vision of himself and others. This simple change creates a shield against the ego that insists on growing without limits. This path isn't simple or quick, but it's the only one capable of balancing the scale between self-confidence and realism. And by embracing this journey, the person not only avoids the imminent ruin of ego inflation, but opens space for a more authentic and meaningful life. Now a question remains: how will it be possible to apply this transformation in practice amid the pressures of daily life? That's something we'll discover together. The journey we've taken together today wasn't meant to be just heard. It was meant to be lived. Every insight, every reflection, and every provocation are seeds that need to be planted in your routine, in your way of thinking, and in how you face challenges. It's not enough to understand the depth of these ideas. You need to use them as tools to rewrite your own story. So tell me, which point moved you the most? Which truth exposed here won't let you sleep peacefully anymore? Change begins the instant you decide to act, and not tomorrow, not when you have time, but now. Are you willing to challenge the beliefs that keep you trapped? To look in the mirror and face the version of yourself that needs to be transformed? Or will you keep feeding the same excuses that keep you in the same place? This choice is yours alone, but what you do from here can define the direction of your life for years to come. If this conversation awakened something in you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep exploring ideas that expand the mind and transform the soul. And don't stop here. On the end screen, you'll find another video that will deepen this inner dive even further. It's waiting for you to continue this journey. Your transformation starts now.